Welcome back to another YouTube video at Aquarium Arts. Today, we're gonna get into the basics of saltwater and reef tank chemistry. It's not uncommon for a beginner to think that water is just water and there's nothing more to it. So today, we're gonna get into the 8 parameters that are critical for your reef tank. These are gonna include ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, pH, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and phosphate. Ammonia is toxic to the fish and should be the first thing you test for in the aquarium. It should be at 0 parts per million. When you start the aquarium, you're gonna wanna put a bacterial starter into it. This can be a product like Fritz Turbo Start, Brightwell Microbacter 7, or Start Smart Complete. Now these bacterial starters are gonna turn ammonia into nitrite, and another bacteria is gonna consume nitrite and turn it into nitrate. We'll get into more of that in just a little bit. Nitrite is the next stage in the cycle and is also toxic to fish at high levels. But to be honest, no one really struggles with this past the cycle. If you are struggling with nitrite 2 months, 3 months down the road, check on your feeding. You might be overfeeding the aquarium. If your nitrite is still high after 2-3 months, you can also do water changes and dose more bacteria to the aquarium. Your nitrite should be 0 parts per million. Anything over that is just extra stress on your fish. Nitrate is the third and final part of the cycle that we pay attention to in our reef tanks. Nitrate is something that a lot of reef keepers struggle with. It's the third step of the cycle, and on average, it should be somewhere between 0 parts per million to 10 parts per million. If your nitrate gets too high in the aquarium, it can do damage to your fish and corals. Now that we're through the cycling stuff, we're gonna talk about pH. pH is one of the most important parameters in the reef aquarium. Corals uptake calcium and alkalinity best when the pH is between 8.0 to 8.3. So an easy way to say that is, when the pH is higher, the corals grow better. If you're struggling with your pH, I would urge you to take a look at your protein skimmer and adjust your flow in your aquarium. If your flow is not correct in the aquarium, you're gonna get dead spots. This is where fish waste will settle. When the fish waste settles, it turns into carboxylic acid, which drops your pH. Tuning your protein skimmer properly will oxygenate the aquarium and pull out waste, which can help to combat pH issues. Ultimately, water flow and oxygen is going to be the biggest determiner of keeping a successful pH. If you are still struggling past that, you may want to look into things like CO2 scrubbers or Kalkwasser, but usually if you can lock in the protein skimmer and get proper flow in the aquarium, you're not going to have pH issues. The next chemical that we watch out for is phosphate. Phosphate should be between 0.03 and 0.1 parts per million. Phosphate is critical for the health of your reef, but if it gets too high, you might start to notice that your corals aren't growing anymore, or they start to turn brown. Now, phosphate and nitrate levels are often debated on the reef aquarium hobby. These are the general ranges we like to keep them in the aquarium. Now we're gonna move into the major reef elements. This is probably what you're waiting for in this video. Now into the major reef elements. This is alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. First one we're gonna talk about is alkalinity. Alkalinity is one of the precursors to the calcium carbonate skeleton of the coral. It makes up the carbonate part. Corals need alkalinity in the aquarium to stay stable and consistent so that they can grow. Now, all of the parameters in the reef tank are very important, but alkalinity gets most of the attention. This is because it's the most likely to fluctuate day to day, especially in a thriving reef tank. You should aim to keep your alkalinity between 7 to 12 DKH. Now I know that's a big range, but in general, I recommend that you keep your alkalinity at the same level that your salt mixes to. For us, we use Tropic Marin Pro Reef salt, so our alkalinity is usually between 7.5 to 8.0 DKH. The reason we recommend that you keep it close to your salt is so that if you ever have to do a major water change, it's not going to throw off your water chemistry. We'll get into more details on how to actually maintain these parameters in a separate video. For now, we're going to move into calcium. Calcium is the other part of the coral skeleton. Now, calcium is just as important as alkalinity, but it's less likely to fluctuate drastically. Calcium is very important to indicating the health of your corals. If you notice your corals are starting to get brittle, you may have calcium that's too low. Your calcium should be from 450 to 500 parts per million. Again, we like to keep it at 475 parts per million because that's the closest to Tropic Marin Pro Reef salt. Furthermore, it's really important to watch your calcium and alkalinity, because if your alkalinity is dropping and your calcium is not, it might indicate that you have a pH issue in your aquarium, and you should take a look at some of the solutions we talked about earlier. Now, if your calcium and alkalinity are both decreasing, then it means your corals are growing, and all you need to do is start dosing. Again, we're gonna get into that in a different video. Now, magnesium is going to be the last major reef parameter we're gonna talk about today, but I do wanna put stress on the importance of keeping your salinity and temperature stable. In a reef aquarium, your salinity should be around 1.025 to 1.026 specific gravity, and your temperature should be 70. Now, I took the time to throw that into this video because if those two parameters are not correct, then everything else we test for is not going to be an accurate representation of the aquarium. But now, let's get back into magnesium. Magnesium is critical in the reef aquarium. If it gets below 1200 parts per million, you'll start to see your corals stress. We recommend keeping your magnesium at 1350 parts per million. This is right in the sweet spot between the minimum and max levels of magnesium. Now, the exact role magnesium plays in coral growth is a little difficult to explain, but here's what we know. If your magnesium is not in the correct range, your corals will start to struggle and growth becomes near impossible. Across most of biology, this is a common theme even in humans. If our magnesium levels aren't right, our brain struggles and our muscles start to struggle. Now, with that being said, it's very important to check your magnesium levels regularly and keep it between 1280 parts per million to 1500 parts per million. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. In a separate video, we're gonna get into how to maintain all these parameters, but make sure to like and subscribe and stop in the store.